This turned into a brainstorming workshop on the different structures of the papers that people are already working on. For example, one of the papers has a completely linear structure already, and the author is working on the thesis in the order of structures, or the order of sections, and is now moving to the discussion section. For most of the other papers, people have lots of sections and different pieces of sections already. One paper mostly needs a style shift to like Chicago. Another paper is looking at kind of the history, a historical comparison between two areas during the Renaissance, and so the paper is set up through historical sequencing around philosophy and religion and politics. Another paper is working on the Species Acts, and we tried to separate that paper into different sections to see what it was doing. The first half of the paper is pretty clearly laid out, but the second half is where the sections are less clear about what brings them together. So we looked at the different keywords for each of those sections, and we came up with speciesism, and then there was culture, and then capitalism. So I started saying, maybe this is all about the isms, right? Imperialism, humanitarianism. So it really is kind of about a value system. And so the goal for this writer is to go back and work on this particular section, the second half of the paper, which has 3 sections, and to make sense of kind of the pieces that bring these three sections together into one larger section. It seems that the paper is set up between kind of a theoretical, what we should do, and the second half is what we really do. Okay. For another paper, we looked at, this paper already has intro and methods, and then there's the history, and we tried to talk about what are the different sections. One of them was about women and race, another blacks in the West, another Pacific Northwest and labor, and then a final one on blacks, women, and Boeing. And so it sounded to me like maybe what's really going on is that there's a sounded to me like what really might be going on, sorry about that pause there, is that there's really a regional thing that's happening where the first section is about women and race, but really it's women and race maybe in the U.S. And then the next one moves to the West. And then the next one, the Pacific Northwest. And then another one, Boeing specifically. So there's like 3 places. And it seems like a good way to set this up is kind of have the paper move in kind of some linear fashion from large to smaller place. And it looks like culture, or actually race, is really in all of them, it sounded like, and labor. So the task for this paper is going to be to go back and work on that section, those 4 little areas around that have been defined, and bring them together, and then style shift them by bringing in more narrative. For the next section, we went back to the paper that's looking at Italy and the Renaissance and the U.S., and what seems to be standing out is the defining of individualism and liberty was already pretty clear. That was a solid section that needed to happen. When we looked at the other sections, we saw, okay, philosophy and religion, then emerging political structure, and it was always Italy versus the U.S. compared. So I wondered if really what's going on is there more of a kind of like a box section of present to emerging, and what is it about the time period? Are they the same time period or different time periods? And so what we really figured out is, oh, maybe there's something around kind of an early period, or pre-period, in the moment, the modern period, and then the late period. And that maybe a better way to set this up is to show that they are kind of following the same structure historically, even though they're not happening during the same time period, because what was happening in Italy was happening from 1450 to 1600, and in the U.S. it was 1750 to 1776. but even though it's a different time period, they can still structurally kind of move in similar ways. So these are what these particular papers, how they're set up right now, and each of the writers is going to go back over the weekend, and part of their draft process is going to be to just work on that section, that big section that seems to be most an area that's not as coherent yet, and they're going to go make that section more coherent and just bring an introduction. So next class they'll bring an introduction and just the revisions they made to that big section, which is quite a task already.